After years of marriage, what secrets could remain? For Eleanor, the answer was buried in her backyard, and it would change everything she thought she knew. Hey, Soul Stories fam, we've got a sweet and totally swoon-worthy love story for you today. Let's jump in. The lobby of the Winter Pearl Hotel in Long Island looked that morning like an undercover fashion show. Golden light spilled across the gleaming marble floor, reflecting off polished leather shoes and luxurious Italian luggage. In the corner, a massive Christmas tree dusted with artificial snow stood tall, filling the air with the scent of pine and sweet cinnamon. Olivia Bennet was dragging her suitcase along, silently cursing her boots. Freelance photographer might sound glamorous, but in reality, ever since she'd left Seattle for New York, she'd been hauling everything herself, from tripod and lenses to a prop kit that felt like it weighed a ton. Right now, she looked more like a storm survivor than an artist about to capture rare winter sea moments on the East Coast. This trip was supposed to lift her spirits, Olivia reminded herself. After breaking up with her boyfriend, a so-called indie musician with a knack for charming female fans backstage, she had decided to accept an assignment from a travel magazine in New York. White sands, foaming waves, and crisp, chilly mornings. It sounded like a dream. Too bad that so far the dream was nowhere in sight and her arms already ached. She stopped in the middle of the lobby, scanning for someone who could help carry her suitcase upstairs. And then she saw him, a tall man, white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal sunburned forearms, light gray dress pants, leaning casually against a marble column. His dark hair was neatly combed back with a few strands falling loose in a way that looked both lazy and intentional. He was focused on his phone, completely oblivious to the world around him. Bellhop found one, Olivia thought, striding toward him, her suitcase wheels clattering across the floor. Hey, could you take this up to room 1703 for me? She asked, not exactly ordering, but definitely not pleading. The man looked up. Smoky gray eyes locked onto hers, deep and cold enough to make her falter for half a second. Then his lips curved, not in a friendly way, but the kind of smile that made you want to punch him and maybe keep looking anyway. I don't work here. His voice was low, unhurried. But if you need, I can charge you $10 a suitcase, 15 if there are stairs. Olivia blinked. Very funny. If you're not staff, then don't stand here blocking the way. He shrugged, slipping his phone into his pocket. I was here before you. And for the record, you're the one who bumped into me. Bumped? Olivia drew in a breath, her hand tightening on the suitcase handle. My suitcase didn't even touch you. It got blocked by your attitude. A middle-aged couple passed by, giving them curious looks. The man in front of Olivia didn't seem to care. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes flicking from her suitcase to the camera, hanging around her neck, then lingering on her eyes, which were now gleaming with defiance. Did you come to New York just to argue with strangers? He asked, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Or is this your special way of asking for someone's number? Olivia almost laughed at the sheer audacity, but she caught herself. If I wanted your number, trust me, I'd have it before you even realized. But I don't. Good to know. He gave a small nod, lowering his voice. The last thing I need this vacation is a demanding guest following me around. Olivia bit her lip, not out of embarrassment, but to stop herself from firing off a string of comebacks that would probably cost her dignity. Just another bored hotel guest, she told herself, not worth the energy. Fortunately, a black-suited receptionist appeared, ushering her toward the check-in desk. Olivia glanced at him one last time, just enough to notice those gray eyes still on her. Not hostile, but far from friendly. Damon Cross leaned back, hands in his pockets, watching the woman with the fiery blue eyes walk away. He wasn't often mistaken for staff. Usually, the moment people heard his name, the entire hotel switched in to treat him like the most important guest on Earth mode. But this time, he hadn't corrected her right away. Seattle, he guessed, based on her luggage tags, and judging by how she held her camera like it was part of her body. She was either a photographer or a journalist. Women like her, passionate, independent, ready to argue to the bitter end, rarely caught Damien's attention, yet somehow she intrigued him. His vacation in New York was little more than an excuse. After a failed deal with a European conglomerate, he needed to get out of the office for a couple of days to avoid a barrage of constructive feedback from the board. The Winter Pearl was one of his company's hotels and ironically enough had just become the place where a stranger mistook him for a bellhop. Damon chuckled, shaking his head as he headed for the check-in counter. He wondered if this would be the last time he saw her or the start of something entirely different. Olivia signed the check-in form, making sure to ask the receptionist to send a few of her heavier cases up ahead. She breathed in the bergamot scent drifting through the lobby, trying to erase the image of those cold, gray eyes from her mind, but that faintly mocking curl of his lips clung to her thoughts like a stubborn lipstick stain. No time for nonsense like this. This trip was for working, relaxing, and proving to herself that she was perfectly fine on her own. The elevator stopped on the 17th floor. Olivia pulled her suitcase out, telling herself she'd take a long shower, make a hot cup of cocoa, and catch up on all the sleep she'd missed on the flight. She had no idea that somewhere else in this very hotel, The man she'd put in his place downstairs had just checked in and was planning to stay longer than he'd originally intended. Olivia unlocked the door to suite 1703 with the kind of relief one feels after a long day. The room was spacious and luxurious with floor-to-ceiling windows looking straight out at the ocean. Winter afternoon light streamed through the glass, bathing everything in a warm honey-gold glow. She pushed her suitcase inside, took the camera strap from around her neck, and set it on the desk. She was just about to sink into the elegant gray sofa when her eyes froze. A man's white dress shirt hung casually over the back of a chair. On the coffee table sat an open laptop, its screen filled with spreadsheets. And the final straw, a still steaming espresso, sat beside it. Olivia frowned. No way. The bathroom door clicked open. Wisps of white steam drifted out, followed by the steady sound of footsteps across the wooden floor. And then, like something out of a movie she swore she never wanted to see, Damon Cross emerged, hair still damp, towel in hand, shirt hanging open and unbuttoned. You Olivia's eyes widened. What are you doing in my room? Damien stopped for a beat, then raised an eyebrow. Funny, I was just about to ask you the same thing. This is room 1703. She held up her key card. I checked in 10 minutes ago. He sat down the towel, reached for his wallet on the table, and pulled out an identical key card printed with the same number 1703. Looks like we're playing a round of who's the legal owner of this suite. You must be mistaken, Olivia said, crossing her arms. I booked this room last week. So did I, Damien replied evenly, though the corner of his mouth twitched. Maybe the hotel's testing out a social Airbnb concept. Olivia shot him a glare. I'm calling the front desk, she dialed, explaining the situation in full, sprinkling in a few sharp remarks about unprofessional service. On the other end, the receptionist sounded mortified. Miss Bennett, we sincerely apologize. There was a booking system error that accidentally assigned 2 guests to the same suite. Unfortunately, due to a large conference tonight, we have no available rooms to move you to until tomorrow morning. You mean I have to share with Olivia? Turned to see Damien leisurely pouring himself more coffee as if watching a good play with Mr. Cross. Yes, the receptionist finished hopefully. We'd like to offer you both a complimentary dinner as an apology. I don't need dinner. I need privacy, Olivia said sharply. I'm afraid we really have no other option. Ma'am, the receptionist replied, voice trailing off. Hanging up, Olivia stood still for a few seconds before turning to Damien. Fine, but I'm warning you. I don't like noise. I don't like strong-smelling food. And I don't. Her eyes flagged to his unbuttoned shirt. Do public displays of skin. Noted, Damien said, setting his cup down without missing a beat. And my rules, no dirty shoes on the carpet, no loud phone calls after 10. And absolutely no touching my coffee. We need clear boundaries, Olivia declared, dragging her suitcase toward the middle of the room. She unzipped it, pulling out a roll of black duct tape, something every travel photographer carried for gear repairs. Bending down, she began taping a straight line across the suite floor, her side on the left, his on the right. This is my territory, she said, pointing to the side with the master bedroom, desk, and secondary balcony. You stay over there. Damien crossed his arms, watching her like an archaeologist observing someone mapping a battlefield. Looks like a Cold War border. You planning to station guards? Not necessary. Olivia shot him a razor-sharp look. I'll know if you cross it. And if I need, he pretended to think. Salt and pepper? By your own? Damon chuckled. You're actually serious about this? Dying from exposure to your personality is not on my to-do list. Olivia replied dryly. They stared at each other for a few moments, testing if the other would break the truce first. Finally, Damon shrugged, retreated to his territory, and opened his laptop to start typing. Olivia wheeled her suitcase into the bedroom and shut the door. Leaning back against it, she exhaled. Just one night, she told herself. Tomorrow morning, the front desk would sort it out, and she'd never have to see those gray eyes again. Out in the living area, Damon typed away, the corner of his mouth still faintly curved. This woman with her duct tape and her commander's tone was more entertaining than he'd expected. And if he was honest, he didn't exactly hate the idea of sharing the suite until morning. When Olivia stepped out of the bedroom after a long photo editing session, a rich aroma had already spread through the suite. Not the usual scent of coffee, but the warm fragrance of melting butter mixed with sauteed garlic laced with a hint of the sea. She froze in the doorway. The dining table in the center of the living room was covered with a white cloth set with fine porcelain plates, golden grilled lobster, seared scallops, creamy seafood soup, and a chilled bottle of white wine beaded with condensation. At the head of the table, Damon Cross was pouring wine, his movements slow and deliberate like a crystal glassware commercial. He wore a dark dress shirt, this time fully buttoned, though his sleeves were neatly rolled to reveal his wrist and a silver watch. What is all this? Olivia crossed her arms, tilting her head at the scene. Dinner, he replied simply, setting a glass in the seat opposite him. Hours, she repeated, enunciating each word. I don't recall ordering anything or agreeing to have dinner with you. Damon shrugged. I thought you'd want a proper meal after a long flight and an afternoon locked in your room. Then you thought wrong. Olivia stepped closer to the table, her gaze lingering on the vivid red lobster centerpiece. I'm allergic to seafood. Damon looked up, brows lifting slightly. Allergic? No one told me that. Why would I tell a stranger who orders food without asking me? Her voice climbed a notch. Well, he leaned back in his chair, tapping his finger lightly on the rim of his glass. Because if you had, I would have ordered something else. Now I'm stuck eating all of this by myself. Sounds a bit pitiful, don't you think? Olivia narrowed her eyes. You made the problem, solve it yourself. I'll order a sandwich. Damon gave a faint smile, tilting his head as if studying an unusual specimen. Are you always this defensive? Only when people try to impose on me, she said, pulling out her phone to open a food delivery app. Or Damien laced his fingers together on the table and leaned forward. You could try this cream soup. No seafood, just vegetable broth. I made sure to ask the chef. Olivia stared at him, searching for signs this was just another sly trick. Finally, she sat down in the chair opposite him reluctantly. 1 spoon. If I have a reaction, you'll be responsible. Of course, he said, scooping a small spoonful and placing it gently in her bowl. She took a taste and while it was annoyingly good, warm, velvety, rich, yet delicate, Damien didn't comment, but his mouth twitched ever so slightly when her expression softened. See, he said at last. I'm not completely thoughtless. Olivia set her spoon down. Just 1 spoon. Don't think you've won anything here. Not one. He said, taking a sip of wine. Just scored a point. She rolled her eyes, but the corner of her lips curved before she could stop it. Are you always this overconfident? Only when the other person is interesting. Damon replied without missing a beat. In that moment, amid the buttery garlic scent and the warm glow of the chandelier, something shifted just slightly. They were no longer 2 strangers glaring at each other, but 2 opponents realizing this match might not be a battle at all. Maybe it was a dance. I'm still ordering that sandwich, Olivia said, though her voice had softened. And don't you ever order food for me without asking again. Agreed. Damon nodded. As long as next time you'll at least sit and eat with me. She looked at him ready with a retort, but instead she just took another spoonful of soup. The 17th floor of the Winter Pearl was unusually quiet that night. City lights cast warm amber patches on the sweet ceiling, while the fake snow outside the windows sparkled like frozen fireworks. Olivia had just finished shooting a few sunset scenes by the sea, her body aching, longing for nothing more than a soak in a hot bath. She opened her bedroom door, tossed her coat onto a chair, and reached for the zipper of her turtleneck knit dress. When the fabric slipped to the floor, she was left in a simple black lingerie set, the kind she wore for comfort while working without giving a single thought to anyone watching. And she definitely hadn't considered one very important detail, the wide glass wall that connected the bedroom to the living room. During the day it was beautiful, offering an unobstructed view of the entire city. At night, with the bedroom light on and the curtains forgotten, it turned into a free performance for anyone on the other side. Olivia was just reaching for an oversized t-shirt to sleep in when she heard steady footsteps outside. She turned, and at that exact moment, Damon walked past, coffee cup in hand, his gaze apparently sweeping across the glass. The moment lasted far longer than it should have. He paused mid-step, eyes widening slightly, and if Olivia didn't know for sure he was a billionaire, she might have thought his operating system had just frozen. Oh my God, Olivia yelped, snatching a towel from the bed and wrapping it around herself in record time. You pervert. The coffee in Damien's hand nearly spilled, but he quickly stepped back, both hands raised in surrender. I didn't mean to. You didn't close the curtains. Who changes clothes in front of a window like that? This is my room. Olivia shot back, marching to the doorway, still wrapped in the towel like battle armor. And you're not allowed to look. I didn't want to look, Damon retorted, though his voice caught slightly as if his brain was still replaying the scene. Olivia crossed her arms tightly, eyes sparking. You seriously need to learn how to respect someone's privacy. And you need to learn to remember the curtains, he countered, half serious, half trying to mask his own discomfort. They stood there glaring at each other like 2 cats whose tails had just been stepped on. The air was thick, not only with irritation, but with something Olivia refused to name. Heat flushed her face, and she hated to admit it wasn't just from embarrassment. Damon broke the silence first, exhaling. He set his coffee down on a side table and raised a hand in truce. All right, new rule. What rule? Olivia asked, still guarded. No one comes within 2 meters of the duct tape border unless they've knocked or been invited, he said, tilting his head slightly as if waiting for her verdict. Olivia considered it. At a clause, no accidental eye contact across the visual boundary. Visual boundary? Damon arched a brow, the corner of his mouth twitching. Sounds like something out of a non-disclosure agreement. All the more reason it makes sense. Olivia replied, keeping her tone stern. They held each other's gaze for a few seconds before Damon extended his hand as if sealing a deal. Olivia hesitated for a beat, then shook it quick and firm, like 2 business people closing a contract. Good, she said. Now you can go back to your coffee. And unclosing the curtains. Perfect, Damon replied, though as he turned away his lips curved just a little more. He wouldn't admit it, but the image of Olivia wrapped in a towel, cheeks flushed, was going to linger longer than he expected. Olivia shut the bedroom door and yanked the curtains closed. Sitting on the edge of the bed, her heart was still racing. Just an accident, she told herself, but if it was really just an accident, why was it suddenly so hard to focus? Out in the living room, Damon sat on the sofa, eyes on his laptop, but the words from their exchange kept replaying in his head along with that unexpected glimpse through the glass. He shook his head, chuckling to himself. Maybe this vacation was going to be more interesting than he'd planned. The winter night lay over the city like a heavy, quiet blanket. But inside Suite 1703, the stillness was utterly shattered. Olivia tossed and turned in bed, staring wide-eyed at the ceiling. The culprit, the steady tack-to-tack of laptop keys from the living room. On top of that, the bluish glow from the screen slipped in through the gap under her door. An uninvited reminder that there was a sleepless, time-oblivious man just a few meters away. She had counted the keystrokes up to the 17th uninterrupted burst before she had enough. Marching out of the bedroom, Olivia found Damon sitting on the sofa, slightly hunched forward, his hands moving quickly as if he were playing the piano. On the table beside his laptop was a half-full glass of red wine. He wore a black t-shirt, his hair slightly mussed, looking entirely absorbed in his own world. "Do you know what time it is?" she demanded, hands on her hips. 117, Damon answered without looking up. "That's still 3 minutes before it's officially midnight." "I need to sleep," Olivia said, stepping closer, her blue eyes bright in the lamplight. "You're typing like you're trying to send Morse code to the whole city." "I'm working," he replied flatly, "and you might want to get used to it. This is my territory, this is our suite," she shot back. "If you want to ruin your own sleep, at least do it in a 24-hour cafe." Damien finally looked up, his gray eyes narrowing. "Are you giving me orders?" "Call it a request," Olivia said, folding her arms. "A polite request." A short laugh escaped him, not exactly amused, before he bent down and resumed typing. Tack-to-tack, Olivia felt heat rise to her head. She took another step forward, intending to jab a finger at his screen to make her point when her arm brushed against the wine glass. Everything happened in slow motion. The glass tipped, crimson liquid spilling in a rush, soaking the laptop keyboard. Damien shot up, grabbing for the machine. But it was too late. The screen flickered twice and went black. "What the hell did you just do?" His voice was deeper now, resonating through the room like thunder in a closed space. "I didn't mean to." Olivia took a step back, hands up. "Didn't mean to." His eyes were ice cold as he set the laptop on the table. "Do you have any idea how important that data is? I've been working on that project for months." "Well, you didn't mean to let me sleep either." She fired back, though her voice trembled. "Don't dump all the blame on me." Damien stepped closer, closing the gap between them to just a few handspans. He was taller by far, his shadow falling over her, making the room feel smaller. His gaze locked onto hers, sharp enough to pierce through every layer of defense. "Olivia Bennett," he said slowly, "you need to learn to take responsibility for what you do." Her pulse quickened. He took another step, and in that instant, her mind screamed, "Danger!" She thought he was about to pin her to the wall, so her instinctive reaction was smack. Her palm landed hard across his left cheek. They both froze. Damien touched his face, but instead of getting angry, his lips curved. "Interesting," he murmured. Olivia hadn't even processed the word before his hand closed gently but firmly around her forearm, pulling her toward him, and before she could react, his mouth was on hers. It wasn't like any kiss she'd ever known, not gentle, not tentative. It was strong, claiming, a deliberate reclaiming of control after her slap. She tasted the lingering red wine on his lips, felt the heat of his breath, the pounding of his heart in sync with her own. Olivia stood frozen. Part of her wanted to shove him away and shout in his face, but another part, a part she refused to acknowledge, was caught in the pull of his force, unable to move. Then Damien released her. They were still close enough that she could feel his breath on her skin, that his voice was lower, rougher than usual. "So you remember I'm not someone you can treat however you please." Olivia swallowed hard, words failing her. She turned, walking quickly back to the bedroom and slamming the door. Leaning against it, she pressed a hand to her chest, her heartbeat still chaotic. Out in the living room, Damon sank back onto the sofa, absently rubbing the cheek still warm from her slap. He had no idea what had possessed him to do. That he wasn't usually a man who acted on impulse, but with Olivia, every rule he'd lived by seemed to crumble. Both of them knew that from that moment on. The duct tape border on the floor was nothing more than a meaningless line. The next morning, Olivia still wasn't ready to face Damien after last night. She left her bedroom later than usual, hoping he'd gone out. But when she stepped into the living room, there he was, lounging comfortably on the sofa, reading a brochure the color of seafoam blue. "What's that?" she asked warily. "Hot activities." Damon held the paper out. "They're running a morning tandem kayaking session mandatory for guests on the upper floors to enhance bonding experiences." Mandatory? Olivia sounded doubtful. "Yep," he nodded, his mouth curving slightly. "And the receptionist already signed us up." Olivia opened her mouth to protest, But her phone buzzed. A text from the front desk. See you at the hotel dock at 9 o'clock a.m. Please wear comfortable clothing. This is a free and mandatory activity, she sighed. Unbelievable, she muttered. Though in her mind, she admitted kayaking outside sounded safer than staying in the suite with Damon. The dock was set just beyond the hotel's winter garden. Morning sunlight danced on the rippling water and a light breeze carried the scent of salt. Couples in small groups queued for life vests. Olivia received hers, then turned to see Damon already suited up, looking like he'd stepped out of a luxury sportsier at navy polo. Beige shorts, sunglasses hooked casually on his collar. You'll paddle left. I'll paddle right, he said in a tone that could have belonged to a coach. And why don't you paddle left? Olivia asked, raising an eyebrow. Because I'm right-handed, he replied matter-of-factly. And because I'm a captain, self-appointed captain, huh? She shot back. They stepped into the yellow kayak. The moment Olivia sat down, she realized how wobbly it was. Damien, on the other hand, looked perfectly at ease, like he'd done this all his life. Ready? He asked. Yeah, she said a little less than confidently. 1, 2, 3, paddle, Damien called. Olivia dipped her paddle on the left, Damon on the right. Instead of moving straight, the kayak spun in a perfect circle. Second attempt, still spinning. Third attempt, same result. Could it be? Olivia said between strokes that my captain doesn't actually know how to paddle. I'm paddling correctly, Damon insisted. You're just pushing too hard on the left. I'm following your count, she shot back. They kept bickering, the kayak turning like a giant yellow pinwheel on the water. Other boats were already gliding far ahead, their passengers' laughter carrying across the bay. Finally, Olivia exhaled sharply. All right, let's try again. I'll ease up. You push harder on the right. Damon nodded. Follow my count. 1, 2, 3. This time, the kayak moved straight, slicing neatly through the water. Olivia allowed herself a small smile, a smile just big enough for Damien to catch in his peripheral vision. See, he said, winning team, only because I adjusted to you, she replied, but her tone had lost its earlier bite. They began to find their rhythm. Cool water splashed up around them, the breeze threading through their hair. The banter faded into the sound of paddles dipping in unison and waves lapping against the hull. Every so often, Damon glanced over, catching Olivia's focused expression, the sunlight turning her blue eyes luminous. The few loose strands of hair dancing in the wind. The sight was unexpectedly peaceful. When they finally reached the dock, both were breathing hard, but smiling. And not the usual sly, mocking smiles they traded, but something lighter. Genuine. Not bad, Damon said, pulling off his life vest. Not bad. Olivia echoed, shaking his hand on instinct, like teammates after a good match. In that brief handshake, both realized something. When they moved in sync, everything felt much easier. The thought slipped through Olivia's mind. Maybe in some things we don't have to always be on opposite sides. Damien kept only a faint smile on his lips, but deep down he knew this morning had brought them closer, not just in kayak seating distance. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. That afternoon, Olivia decided it was time to put an end to the shared room situation once and for all. She marched straight to the front desk, rehearsing the speech in her head. I'll pay extra if I have to, as long as I don't have to share a room with that man. The receptionist, a young blonde woman, gave her an apologetic smile after hearing her request. I'm very sorry, Miss Bennett. Every remaining room is fully booked. The winter conference this year is larger than expected, and your suite was the last one available when you checked in. What about a small room, even one without windows? Olivia tried. The woman shook her head. I'm afraid not, ma'am. But if any guest cancels, I'll contact you immediately. Olivia sighed as she walked away from the desk. Perfect. So she was stuck with Mr. White dress shirt until the end of the weekend. Not wanting to return to the suite just yet, she decided to head up to the rooftop hot pool to soak off the bad energy before enduring a few more days of room sharing. That afternoon, New York was graced with rare winter sunshine. The Winter Pearls rooftop opened its outdoor hot pool, drawing quite a crowd of guests eager to unwind. Olivia planned to spend a few hours there, partly to soothe the muscle aches from that morning's kayaking session, and partly to avoid certain company. At least that's what she thought. When Olivia stepped out into the pool area, the gentle splash of water and the faint scent of chlorine mixed with the crisp air. She wore a simple teal bikini under a white robe, setting her towel and camera on a lounge chair. She inhaled deeply, slipped off the robe, and descended the pool steps into the warm water. At first, it was bliss. Steam curled up into the air, softening the distant skyline. Olivia swam slow, lazy laps, letting her thoughts drift. She thought about the kayaking, about that moment when the boat finally went straight, when they'd laughed, and when their handshake had felt like teammates, not rivals. As much as she hated to admit it, Damon hadn't just been irritating. He'd been surprisingly good at working with her. She swam a few more laps, her muscles loosening until she nearly forgot everything else. But as she pushed off the wall for another turn, a sudden sharp pain clenched her right calf. Olivia gasped, trying to kick, but the muscle seized as if twisted tight. Oh God, she panted. water splashing into her mouth. Her right leg went useless, her body tipping to one side. She flailed, panic rising. Don't panic, don't panic. But the pool was deeper than she'd realized, and her breathing quickened. Olivia. A deep, familiar voice cut through the water and wind. Before she could turn her head, a tall figure dove in from the pool's edge. Water surged around her, and seconds later, a strong arm wrapped firmly around her waist. Easy, Damien said, his voice close to her ear. I've got you. Olivia clung to his shoulder instinctively, feeling the power in each stroke as he guided them toward the pool's edge. Within moments, they reached a spot where her feet could touch the bottom. Damon helped her onto a lounge chair, water streaming from both of them. Though her calf was still knotted tight. Cramp? He asked, kneeling in front of her. His tone gentler now. Yeah, she exhaled, trying to rub the muscle herself. Let me. His hand closed around her calf, warm and firm. Meeting with slow, deliberate pressure, Olivia startled slightly. She almost told him, I can do it myself. But the soothing heat of his hands working the tension out made her stay still. Damien's brows furrowed in concentration, free of his usual teasing expression. When it's this bad, don't try to keep swimming, he said. His voice steady, but not sharp. Drink some water, relax, then stretch it out gently. You sound like you know your stuff, Olivia quipped, masking the skip in her heartbeat. I was on the swim team in college, he replied, still working the knot. Cramps in deep water aren't something you mess with. She went quiet for a few moments, watching him from this angle, soaked, hair tousled, black t-shirt clinging to a solid frame, but with patient, careful eyes, not at all like the self-appointed captain or sleep disruptor from the night before. Better? Damien asked, looking up at her. Much, she said, avoiding his gaze. He stood and held out his hand. Come on, I'll walk you back to the chairs. Rest a bit. Olivia took his hand, feeling the solid pull as he helped her stand. When she faltered slightly, he placed a light hand on her back, guiding her along the poolside. Such a simple gesture, yet it sent warmth through her, one that had nothing to do with the hot water. They sat side by side for a few minutes, Olivia wrapped in her towel, Damon handing her a bottle of water he'd grabbed from the service table. Thanks for saving me, she said softly. No problem, he shrugged, though the corner of his mouth curved. I'm not always here, so be more careful next time. I have to swim safely when you're not around, she asked, arching a brow. Exactly, he kept his gaze on the water, but she caught the spark of amusement in his eyes. The silence that followed wasn't as uncomfortable as she'd expected. They simply sat, listening to the gentle slap of water and the distant clink of glasses from the bar. Olivia found herself relaxed with Damien, something she thought only days ago would be impossible. When she finally stood to head back to the room, Damon walked with her, carrying her robe. How's the leg? He asked. Fine, she said, though the warmth in her calf lingered not just from the hot water, but from his hands. At the suite door, Damon stepped aside to let her in first. Get some rest, he said, his voice lower than usual. Olivia nodded, retreating to her bedroom and closing the door, leaning against it. She touched her calf lightly, remembering the moment he'd held it. A faint, unguarded smile found her lips before she even realized. Maybe she was starting to see Damien differently, and that thought was equal parts frightening, strange, and not bad at all. That evening, the hotel hosted its winter beach music night, an event that was both elegant and slightly absurd. In the middle of December, a wooden stage had been built on the sand, laid with a red carpet, flanked by glass lanterns and lined with portable heaters radiating warmth. Guests were served hot cocktails and spiced apple rum alongside platters of steaming grilled seafood. Olivia had only planned to take a few photos and leave, but Damon's slightly forceful invitation derailed that plan. Roommates have to keep up team appearances, right? He'd said as she set her camera down. Can't have your sweet mate going to the party alone. Calling me your sweet mate makes it sound like we're in a college dorm. She narrowed her eyes. But fine. The beach at night was more beautiful than she'd imagined. The water was black velvet, reflecting hundreds of golden lights strung along the shore. Olivia leaned against the wooden railing, holding a ruby-red cocktail, letting the salty breeze brush her cheeks. In the distance, Damon was talking with a group of people who looked like business associates. White dress shirt, charcoal blazer, no tie. He still stood out in the crowd, not because of his height or build, but because there was something about him that drew the eye without effort. Olivia looked away, telling herself it didn't matter. She poured another glass of the overly sweet cocktail, so sugary that the alcohol was hardly noticeable. By the third glass, her cheeks felt warm. The live band struck up an upbeat Latin tune, the rhythm coaxing her feet into a subtle sway. Hey, she called when Damon broke away from the group. Come here. He walked over, frowning at the glass in her hand. How many of those have you had? Don't remember, she grinned, her blue eyes catching the lantern light. But enough to decide. You're going to dance with me. I don't dance, he said flatly. Oh, you will. She grabbed his wrist, tugging him toward the open space near the stage. Damon hesitated, not because of her strength, but because no one had ever dragged him anywhere at a party before. Olivia, he began, but the band had already shifted into a lively salsa, drums and guitars weaving together. She placed his hand on her waist and took his other hand in hers. "Come on, Captain," she teased with a wink. Damon let out a short laugh. "You really don't know fear." At first, he just followed the simplest steps, letting her spin herself as she pleased. But Olivia, with a little alcohol and a lot of determination, started adding turns that forced him to match her. To his own surprise, it only took a few beats before he caught on and took the lead. Firm, decisive steps, a steady hand at her waist, and eyes that stayed locked on hers. Olivia laughed, the sound ringing over the surf. "You're better than I thought." "And you're not as bad as I expected," he replied, his gaze never leaving her flushed face. They spun again, golden light glinting in her hair, the scent of sea salt mingling with the faint trace of his cologne. For a moment, the world was only the two of them. No hotel, no arguments, no tape line. When the song ended, Olivia was breathless, a few strands of hair falling loose. Damien still held her hand, leaning slightly toward her. "You all right?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. "Yeah," she said, then broke into a smile. "Did you just call me you in that way?" He only smiled, not denying it. They made their way to a table for drinks. Olivia sipped from a glass of water Damon handed her. He'd swapped out her cocktail without her noticing. Resting her chin on her hand, she studied him for a long moment. "Damien," she said slowly, "you're not as bad as I thought." His brow lifted. "Oh, I mean," she shook her head, searching for words. "I thought you were just an arrogant, cold, bossy guy, but you actually listen, work with people, and you saved someone's life." He didn't answer right away. His eyes held hers as if he were reading all the things she wasn't saying aloud. Then he smiled, a rare smile, free of sarcasm or calculation. "Thank you," he said simply, though his tone carried an unusual warmth. Olivia looked away, wary of how close she might be to crossing a line she'd vowed to keep. But deep down she knew a few bricks in her wall had just shifted. Around 10 p.m., the wind turned colder. Without a word, Damon draped his blazer over her shoulders. "What are you doing?" she asked, a little startled. "Keeping you warm," he said matter-of-factly. "You'll thank me later." She meant to hand it back, but the lingering heat of his body in the fabric kept her quiet. When the band began its final ballad, they didn't dance again. Instead, they stood at the railing gazing out at the night sea. Waves rolled in steady rhythm, the crescent moon laying silver across the water. Damon leaned closer, his voice just above a whisper near her ear. "Do you know that the first time I saw you, you made my heart skip a beat?" Olivia froze, turning toward him, but he only smiled faintly, his eyes deep with something unspoken. "Thank you for being here," he continued, his voice low but deliberate. "And for letting me find you." Olivia opened her mouth, but no answer came. Instead, she turned back toward the ocean, hoping the night wind would hide the heat rising in her cheeks. The next morning, Olivia woke with no trace of a hangover. Despite drinking quite a bit the night before, she figured it was thanks to Damien quietly swapping her cocktails for water during the latter half of the party. For some reason, realizing that made her lips curl into an involuntary smile when she thought of him. Opening her laptop, she reviewed her shot list. Today was the most important day for her winter sea photo series for the travel magazine. She had planned to hire a local assistant, but on a whim, she knocked on the Squet's living room door. Damien was standing by the table tying a tie. He glanced over. "What is it?" "I'm heading to the North Beach for the shoot." "Want to come along?" "Me?" He raised an eyebrow as if the question was entirely unexpected. "Why?" "Because you're free," Olivia said matter-of-factly, "and I need someone to carry the tripod." Damon chuckled, loosening his tie. "All right, but fair warning, I charge a fee." "Your fee will be," she pretended to think, "a hot coffee and one free portrait." "Portrait?" He tilted his head. "I don't think I'm very photogenic." "Trust me." Olivia grabbed her camera with a confident grin. "I can find anyone's best angle." He looked at her for a moment as though weighing something. "Do you know I'm actually not free today?" His voice dropped slightly. "Like sharing a secret." "Really?" She raised an eyebrow. "I thought I have a meeting at 10 o'clock a.m. He held up his phone, showing her his calendar, solid blocks of back-to-back meetings from now until the weekend. But he paused, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "I think a winter beach and a stubborn photographer were worth rescheduling for." Without another word, he tapped his phone, put it to his ear. "Anna, cancel the morning meeting and rearrange the rest." "Yes, I know. Just push it all to next week." Olivia blinked, half wanting to ask why, half not daring to. Damien pocketed his phone, shrugged on his coat. "Led the way, photographer." He smiled as though shifting an entire high-powered schedule was nothing unusual. And as they stepped into the hallway, Olivia realized her heart was beating a little too fast for a normal winter morning. The North Beach was far quieter than the music night venue. Silvered waves crashed against black rocks, frothy spray vanishing into the air. The air was crisp, but the sunlight hit at a perfect slant, turning everything a golden hue ideal for photos. Olivia got to work quickly, climbing onto a rocky outdrop, camera to her eye, adjusting the aperture. Damien stood a few meters back watching. "Careful," he said when she stepped close to the edge. "I've done this for over a decade," she replied, snapping a few shots. "Are you worried about me?" "I'm worried about the camera," he said. but the corner of his mouth twitched. She rolled her eyes and kept shooting. Her lens moved from the waves to circling geese to a small fishing boat offshore to the golden path of sunlight on the water. Damien followed quietly, carrying her tripod and backpack without comment, his gaze never straying far from her. When the light hit its golden hour, Olivia turned to him. "Your turn. I told you I don't stand there," she interrupted, pointing to a rock with the ocean behind it. "Look that way." Damien shrugged and took his position. Olivia lifted the camera and froze for just a second. Through the viewfinder, his face came into focus, lightly tanned from the sun, straight nose, eyes deep enough to hold the whole winter sky. He didn't look like the irritating roommate anymore, but like someone from a magazine cover only. Warmer, more real. "Olivia," Damien's voice broke the moment. "Yeah," she snapped several quick frames. "Done." He stepped closer. "Let me see." She turned the display toward him. Damien studied the shots for a few seconds, then smiled faintly. "Not bad." "Told you," she said, feeling a flicker of pride at the fact that he genuinely liked it. They continued along the shore, Olivia shooting as they went. Damien shared a few stories about his childhood trips to the beaches near Seattle. Olivia recounted the time she nearly lost her camera to a seagull obsessed with her bright red strap. Laughter cut the long walk into something easy and short. When the light began to soften, Olivia told Damien to sit on a rock while she sat on the sand cleaning her lens. He studied her. "You really love this work, don't you?" he asked quietly. "I do," she answered without hesitation. "It gives me a reason to go places, to see the world, to hold on to moments that would disappear otherwise." Damien was silent for a few beats, then said softly, "Maybe that's why you've kept a few of my moments, too." Olivia glanced up, meeting his gaze. There was something there. Something not entirely teasing. She quickly looked back down at her camera. "I'll send you the portrait. Call it a thank you for being my gear carrier today." He chuckled. "Then I'll hang it in my office, to remind me that I once met a photographer who argued with me the moment we met. And one," she added, "that, he said, is still up for debate." But there was no bite in his tone. Back at the hotel, Olivia spent the afternoon culling through her shots. When she reached Damien's portrait, she lingered longer than necessary. He wasn't smiling in the image, but his eyes held a warmth that made you want to look twice. Without really thinking, she opened her email and typed quickly, "Here's the photo I promised. But don't think I'll shoot you again if you keep driving me crazy." She attached the file, hit send, and smiled to herself, imagining his expression when he opened it. The next afternoon, the winter holiday ended. The hotel hallways buzzed with the sound of rolling suitcases and cheerful farewells. Olivia wheeled hers into the lobby just as Damien stepped out of the elevator, sharp in a tailored suit. "Back to Seattle?" he asked. "Yep," she said, pressing her lips together. "You New York," he replied, and added softly, "But Seattle's only a flight away." She gave a small smile, but didn't answer. They checked out and walked to the entrance together. A taxi pulled up for Olivia. Damien opened the door for her, the gesture smooth and effortless. "So we'll keep in touch?" he asked, holding the door. Olivia nodded. "As long as you don't email that photo to the whole world." "Only to the people I want to know," he said. "I once met a photographer who made me rearrange my schedule just to stay." She got into the cab, the door closing between them. The taxi rolled away. Damien standing at the curb, one hand in his pocket, watching until the car disappeared from sight. Weeks later, Olivia was back to her regular work. Occasionally, they exchanged texts. At first, just jokes about coffee or the weather, but over time, short evening video calls crept in. Neither said it aloud, but they both knew. The beach trip hadn't really ended. One afternoon, while researching for a new project, Olivia stumbled upon an old business news article. The headline mentioned a corporate dispute involving her father's name and another Damien Cross. She blinked, scrolling down. The lines that followed made her heart pound. Something here didn't match the story she'd always been told. Seattle, Monday morning. The city wrapped in a thin layer of mist. Olivia sat at her small desk by the window, a cup of black coffee in front of her, fingers poised over the worn silver laptop that had traveled with her through too many assignments. Since her seaside hotel getaway, she'd fallen back into her usual work rhythm, editing wedding photos, replying to emails from past clients, and planning a portrait shoot for the following week. Damien Cross. Well, every now and then, he still sent a short message. "Is it raining in Seattle yet?" Or "How's your coffee this morning?" The kind of texts that were just enough to avoid disappearing entirely, but never enough to promise anything more. Olivia assumed that's where things would end until that email arrived. Subject: potential collaboration cross enterprises from Damien Cross. Olivia blinked several times before clicking. The message was short, direct. "We're preparing a new cross enterprises campaign focused on coastal landscapes and people. I'd like to invite you to be the lead photographer. You can bring your own style. The one that made me stay at the beach longer than I planned." Olivia leaned back, nearly spilling her coffee. Was he serious? Before she could process, her phone buzzed. Damien was calling. "I'm guessing you just read the email." His voice was calm, but there was a faint undercurrent that sounded suspiciously like amusement. Do you always send an email and then immediately call? She asked, raising an eyebrow, even though he couldn't see her. Only when the recipient has a history of ignoring emails. He said smoothly, listen, Olivia, I've gone through hundreds of portfolios. No one captures the feeling of the sea the way you do. The feeling of the sea, she repeated, fighting back a laugh. Sounds like you're saying I'm some kind of mermaid. If you were a mermaid, I'd pre-book an underwater shoot, Damien replied without missing a beat. His tone so dryly playful that Olivia had to turn her face away to hide her smile. She went quiet for a few seconds, scanning her calendar. Big project. Big company, a hefty paycheck. But more than that, a part of her wanted to see who Damien really was beyond the cool suited figure. All right, Olivia said simply, but I want full creative control. You've got it, Damien agreed instantly. And remember to bring your camera. Not a suitcase full of bricks to throw at me this time. A week later, Olivia landed in New York. The city roared and glittered. Lights ricocheting off the glass of skyscrapers. Cross Enterprises occupied the 38th floor of an upscale tower. The elevator door slid open and Damien's assistant greeted her. But when she stepped into the large conference room, she was surprised to find Damien already at the head of the table. White shirt sleeves neatly rolled, tie loosened, just enough polished, but not overly formal. Olivia Bennet, he said, standing to meet her, not with a formal handshake, but with a steaming cup of coffee. Just how you like it. Light on sugar, heavy on milk, you remembered, she asked, genuinely surprised. I remember anything that might make an impression, Damien replied with an easy shrug. As if it were obvious, the meeting began. Olivia had expected to meet only the marketing team and be handed a dry, creative brief, but Damien stayed the entire time, even sketching out his own ideas. Sunlight catching in a dock worker's hair at sunset, waves crashing against an old pier, children playing in the sand. We're not just selling a product, he said, voice low and steady. We're telling the story of the sea, of the people, so that anyone looking at it can almost taste the salt in the air. Olivia found herself watching him quietly. This wasn't the Damien who needled her at the hotel. This was a man with vision, intent, and an ear for listening. Now and then during team debates, he glanced her way as if to ask, well, and she realized she was speaking up more, contributing more than she normally would. When the meeting wrapped, Damien walked beside her down the hall. I told you, he said with a faint smile, no one shoots the sea like you do. But I might have found another reason to invite you if you turned me down. And what reason is that? She asked, half curious, half wary. To make sure you don't walk out halfway through like you did at dinner the other night. He replied, then stepped into the elevator before she could react. Olivia stood there for a moment, her hand tightening on the strap of her camera bag. She wasn't sure she was ready for this project in the emotional sense. But one thing she knew for certain, from the moment she walked into that conference room, the image of Damien in her mind had begun to change. The days that followed were packed with location scouting. From fog-draped harbors at dawn to shaded coastal lanes lined with trees. Damien was always there, not in the tense, supervisory way she'd first imagined, but as a quiet partner who somehow appeared exactly when she needed him. That morning, the sea breeze was sharper than expected. Olivia was setting up her tripod when the chill cut straight through her coat, making her shiver. Before she could comment, a steaming coffee cup appeared in front of her. Don't tell me you guessed right again, she said, wrapping her hands around the welcome heat. I didn't guess, Damien shrugged. I remember you prefer coffee over tea and low sugar. Do you always remember little things like that? Only for people I want to work with. Long term, he replied. His voice low, but his eyes glinting with something teasing. They went on shooting. Damien close by, sometimes adjusting the tripod a fraction, sometimes stepping in to block the wind so she could frame her shot just right. Olivia realized she no longer felt the faint irritation she once did when he was nearby. In fact, his presence made the work easier. One evening, the team decided to have dinner at a small seaside restaurant. The glass doors opened onto a balcony overlooking the waves, the tide rolling in steady rhythm. Under the warm glow of the lights, Olivia noticed Damien had shed his blazer down to a white shirt with rolled sleeves and a loosened tie. He looked less like the corporate CEO and somehow more approachable. I bet you never thought I had a dream that wasn't about money, Damien said when they ended up at a table by the balcony. You'd be right, Olivia admitted. When I was in college, I wanted to be an architect. He looked out at the ocean. I liked the idea of creating spaces where people could feel they belonged. But my father pulled me into Cross Enterprises before I graduated. Olivia was taken aback. In her mind, Damien had always been the man in control, the one who could silence a room simply by walking in. Hearing him speak about an abandoned dream made her realize that beneath the ice was someone who'd sacrificed for something bigger than himself. Do you regret it? She asked. Yes, but if I could go back, I'd still choose to protect my family. Damien's voice was slower now. Still, I sometimes wonder if I could have kept the company and built a few of those dream projects, too. They were quiet for a moment, listening to the waves. Then Olivia laughed when Damien casually stole a bite of her dessert with his fork. Hey, she protested. The contract never said I couldn't take the photographer's food. he said smoothly. She shook her head, but her lips curved. They laughed more that night, and now and then their eyes lingered on each other longer than they needed to. 2 days later, Olivia stayed late at the secondary office to refine concepts for the main shoot. She flipped through project materials, looking for inspiration from past campaigns. Her hand paused on a scanned folder, Cross Enterprises acquisition report 10 years ago. Sue heading acquisition of Bennett Marine Shipping Company. Olivia's heart lurched. Bennett Marine. Her family's company. Her father had run it, and it had collapsed almost overnight, taking with it crushing debt and unrelenting pressure. His sudden death had left a wound that never fully healed. She opened the file, eyes skimming the lines. Cross Enterprises was listed as the buyer of the assets after Bennett Marine defaulted. No detailed account, just enough to send a cold current down her spine. All the mornings he brought her coffee, the times he'd shielded her from the wind. The quiet talks about dreams suddenly dimmed under the weight of one-word acquisition. Olivia sat frozen for a long while before closing the laptop. The warmth that had been building between them was now clouded by a heavy gnawing doubt. She no longer knew what to believe about the man who had slowly found his way into her life, or about the company bearing his name that might have been tied to the worst tragedy of hers. For the past 3 days, Olivia had been avoiding Damien like a storm threatening to tear everything apart. She buried herself in editing photos, choosing angles, and running nonstop between scouting locations in the conference room. If she absolutely had to speak to him, she used clipped curt words so detached that even she found herself unfamiliar. She knew Damon had noticed, but he said nothing. Still, whenever their eyes accidentally met, in those brief seconds, she saw something complicated there, something that made her chest tighten in a way that was both uncomfortable and painful. On the 4th day, after scouting a sunset location for the campaign, Olivia hurried through the hotel lobby toward her room. She thought she would make it without crossing paths with him. But when she turned into the hallway, a tall figure was already standing there. Damien, he didn't block her way aggressively, just stood there, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his phone, though he wasn't looking at it. Olivia, we need to talk. His voice was low, controlled, but couldn't hide the tension. She gripped the strap of her camera bag as if holding onto something that would keep her steady. Talk about what? About how your company destroyed Bennett Marine? Her gaze was as cold as steel, every word sharp-edged. Or about whatever excuses you've been rehearsing. Damon's brows drew together, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. It's not an excuse. The truth is your father signed a reckless contract, lost liquidity, and my father took the opportunity. I opposed it. I tried to enough. Olivia nearly shouted, her voice echoing off the marble hallway. A few guests passing by froze. But she didn't care. Do you think saying I tried changes anything? While my family lost everything, while my father got sick from the shock. Damon inhaled deeply, taking a step closer, narrowing the space between them. His voice was sharper now, but still carried that deliberate restraint. I never wanted that to happen. Do you think I'm the kind of man who celebrates when someone else loses everything? Olivia felt heat rush through her. She wasn't sure if it was anger or something more tangled. She wanted to believe him. God, a part of her had wanted to believe for a long time. But years of nurturing resentment, nights spent watching her father lose sleep, his first heart attack, all of it was like a thick wall of concrete standing between her and any shred of trust. I don't know what kind of man you are anymore. Her voice trembled, caught between fury and a deep ache. But I do know one thing. You stood by your father, and Bennett Marine was still swallowed whole by Cross. Damien's eyes darkened, his shadow stretching long across the wall. He straightened, his shoulders taut, lips pressed into a firm line. If you've already decided to believe the worst about me, then I can't change that. The words felt like a dull blade, not piercing, but scraping deep into the flesh. Olivia turned away, afraid that if she looked into those eyes any longer she might falter. You're right. Her voice caught, lodged somewhere between her throat and her heart. And I don't want to hear any more. She walked away, the click of her heels on the marble floor sounding heavier with every step. She didn't look back. Behind her, Damon stayed rooted in place, unmoving. The golden light cast over his face only made the weariness and shadow in his eyes more visible. When the elevator doors closed, Olivia leaned her forehead against the cold stainless steel. Her heart was pounding, not just from anger, but from something she didn't dare name, a fear that she had just torn apart something precious before she even understood it. Down in the hallway below, Damon still hadn't moved. The phone in his hand lit up with a new notification, but he didn't check it. He only closed his eyes and drew in a slow, deep breath, as if trying to push away the image of the woman who had just walked away, leaving him in a silence heavier than any boardroom he'd ever faced. A week had passed since Olivia left New York, since that conversation that had cut like a blade. Seattle was still raining, the kind of persistent March rain that felt like the sky itself was holding onto a sorrow it couldn't let go. Olivia sat by her apartment window, laptop open, the screen frozen on a photograph of a sunset over the ocean. She hadn't touched the keyboard in hours. The anger that had driven her away had long cooled. But it brought no relief. Instead, there was an uncomfortable emptiness. as if she'd lost something precious and didn't know how to get it back. Finally, one afternoon, she sought out someone, Mr. Harris, her father's former advisor, who had been with Bennett Marine for over 20 years. He greeted her with a warm smile, which quickly shifted to concern when he saw the heaviness in her expression. "You're not here just for tea, or you?" he said, ushering her inside. When Olivia asked about the takeover years ago, Mr. Harris was silent for a long while. At last, he set his teacup down and exhaled as though releasing a burden he'd carried for years. "Damien came to me when Bennett Marine first started to struggle. He wanted to inject capital, share equity, keep the company alive. Not a buyout partnership. Olivia's brow furrowed, her heartbeat picking up. "But your father didn't believe him." Mr. Harris shook his head. "He thought Damien was playing the hero, pretending to be generous just to swoop in and buy cheap when Bennett was at its weakest. He turned him down flat. I urged him to reconsider, but pride and the fear of being exploited won out." Olivia went still. She remembered every word Damien had said in that hotel hallway. Remembered the hurt in his eyes when she told him, "I don't believe you." And now it turned out he had been telling the truth. He had tried, and it was her father who had shut the only door to survival. A hot wave of regret surged through her, sweeping away years of suspicion she had clung to. She realized she had been punishing a man who didn't deserve it, using old pain as a weapon against him. That night she barely slept. She pulled up the set of photos she'd taken of Damien at the New York beach. Not the official shots, but a candid moment when he stood alone, gazing out at the sea, hair tousled by the wind, the sunset lighting his eyes. A man she'd thought she understood, but whom she had only ever seen the surface of. The next morning, she booked a flight to New York. No notice, no rehearsed speech, just a small suitcase and a determination to say what she should have said long ago. Friday morning, JFK Airport was packed. The loudspeakers blared flight updates, mixing with the rumble of rolling suitcases and children calling out for their parents. Olivia cleared security, pulling her suitcase, her heart pounding, and then across the international check-in hall, she saw a familiar figure, Damien. He wore a pale blue shirt under a gray blazer, holding his passport and carry-on. He was glancing at the flight board New York to Seattle. They froze when their eyes met. In that instant, the airport noise seemed to fade, leaving only the pounding in Olivia's chest. Damien walked toward her slowly, staring as if he couldn't believe she was real. "What are you doing here?" His voice was rougher, lower than usual. Olivia gave a sheepish smile, stepping closer. "I was on my way to New York to find you." But it looks like she glanced at his suitcase and boarding pass. "You were heading to Seattle to find me." The corner of Damien's mouth lifted into that familiar smile she'd missed so much. "Looks like we think alike." Olivia drew in a deep breath, swallowing to steady her voice. "I was wrong, Damien," she said, voice trembling but clear. "I didn't believe you even when you told the truth. I'm sorry. And thank you for trying to help my family, even when my father didn't believe you." For a few seconds Damien said nothing, just looked at her. His eyes held something both relieved and warm, like a spring breeze sweeping away the fog. "Apology accepted," he nodded slightly. "But you know, the fact that you're standing here in this airport coming to find me, that's more than enough for me to have forgiven you a long time ago." Olivia let out a laugh through her tears, brushing them away quickly. "So do you still want to make my heart skip a beat every day?" Damien didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms tightly around her, right there among the announcements and the rushing crowd. "As long as you'll let me," he murmured against her ear. A month later, Cross Enterprises' Winter Sea campaign launched to huge success. Images of fishing boats, weathered hands, and the windswept coastline were shared thousands of times. For the first time, Olivia Bennett was featured in one of America's top photography magazines. Damien stayed in New York, Olivia in Seattle, but the distance now was only a few hours' flight and hundreds of messages a day. Damien's business trips sometimes coincidentally overlapped with Olivia's free days and hers with his. The following spring, one morning, while Olivia was setting up her photo exhibition, the studio door opened. Damien stood there in a light coat, a small suitcase beside him. "Checking on a project," he said casually. "What project?" She narrowed her eyes. "A project of staying with you," he replied, lips curving upward. That afternoon, they walked hand in hand along the shore. The spring breeze tossed Olivia's hair, and Damien tilted his head to look at her with a smile. "As long as you keep shooting, I'll keep finding excuses to be in the frame." The shutter clicked in her hands, capturing the moment, a moment Olivia knew she'd keep forever. Proof that some hearts, no matter how wounded, always find their way back to each